It's time to gather loved ones together for all the holidays' best spread. Lynn's has great prices on all your favorite Thanksgiving items, from delicious turkey with all the fixings to mashed potatoes and yummy pies. We have everything you need to create your perfect Thanksgiving dinner. Whether it's cooking the traditional meal, completely store-bought, or a combination of both, your best holiday meal starts here. Learn more and start shopping today at lynsgrocery.com. Lynn's, where delicious begins.
The views and opinions expressed by A Little Bit Culty are those of the hosts and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast.
No, they don't.
Any of the ridiculously thought-provoking content provided by our guests, bloggers, sponsors, or authors are of their opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything. Also, we're not doctors, psychologists, or Her Supreme Holiness Gwyneth Paltrow.
Goop.
We're just two mortals trying to make a gluten-free, holistically helpful podcast that helps, informs, and entertains, and maybe moisturizes. Silky, silky smooth. Hey, everybody. Sarah Edmondson here.
And I'm Anthony Ames, a.k.a. Nippy, Sarah's husband, and you're listening to
A Little Bit Culty,
a.k.a. ALBC, a podcast about what happens when devotion goes to the dark side.
We've been there and back again. A little about us. True story. We met and fell in love in a cult. And then we woke up and got the hell out of Dodge.
And the whole thing was captured in the HBO docuseries The Vow, now in its second season.
I also wrote about our experience in my memoir, Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life.
Look at us, a couple of married podcasters who just happen to have a weekly date night where we interview experts and advocates in things like cult awareness and mind control.
Wait. This does not count toward date night, babe. We got to schedule that. That's separate.
So it's 2 days we got to hang out?
We do this podcast thing because we learned a lot on our exit ramp out of NXIVM, still on that journey, and we want to pay the lessons forward with the help of other cult survivors and whistleblowers.
We know all too well that culty things happen. It happens to people every day across every walk of life. So join us each week to tackle these culty dynamics, everywhere from online dating to mega churches and multi-level marketing.
This stuff really is everywhere. The cultiverse just keeps on expanding, and so are we. Welcome to Season 5 of A Little Bit Culty, serving cult content and word salads weekly on your favorite podcast platforms. Learn more at alittlebitculty.com.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Welcome back, everybody, to Part 2 of 2 with Vanessa Grigoriadis.
This is a part 2. So if you didn't listen to last week's interview with Vanessa, check that one out first.
And as a reminder, Vanessa is a long-form journalist, host, podcaster, mother of 2 children and 2 parrots. Her podcast, Infamous, takes a look at what it's been like to cover some of the most scandalous news stories in modern times. That's where this intersection is with Vanessa, where she worked as a journalist to cover NXIVM. At that time, back in 2018, Vanessa had actually been somewhat duped by the powers that be with NXIVM.
Well, I think, to the point of the podcast, this is how predators work. Vanessa's open, and her openness got leveraged.
Right. On last week's episode, Vanessa spoke about being misled by the likes of Claire Bronfman and Nancy Salzman. Not so much Keith, but you let us know what you think.
Today, we continue to look back at what went down and how, once again, it's easy to be misled and brainwashed, even when you have no idea what's happening. Brainwashed. A little bit strong term there, but...
Indoctrinated. Coercive controlled.
Yes. All the words that are going to get bastardized in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right?
Narcissist, gaslighting, things like that. Okay. Enjoy.
What I found so interesting about your series is listening to it. Like, I remember talking to you and I remember feeling confident the more questions she asked, I think we're going to seem who more we come off as more so than they, right? Like, I knew they were going to hang themselves because there was no gain for us to do what we did. And hearing what I was guessing was going on behind the scenes, like there was literally no surprises in your thing. Like the playbook was so like, I was like, oh, that makes total sense. Like, of course they did. Like they were so predictable.
Claire saying, oh, that's just lying. She's lies, right?
But virtue signaling while she's threatening us. She's like, she's like, we're protecting our A-list actors and our ability. It's like, because we want to protect them. As with every Tom, Dick, and Harry, we have stuff on them. We have stuff on Sarah and Nippy that we could clean the floor with them with. Whatever that line was.
She said go to
I'm
town.
like, dude, did you just threaten us to destroy our lives while pretending to protect us in the same fucking sentence? I was like, the lack of awareness that's going on in that camp, it's like, go,
Right.
have at it. Like,
Right.
it was just,
Right.
they lost so much to us, and it was so predictable, and it still is.
Right, totally. I know. I mean, somebody was saying it's just incredible to hear it from their mouths, right? Like, it's incredible to hear
What's that
it.
like for you?
It's not a shock for me going back to the tapes and like listening to them again.
Yeah, like knowing what you know now, knowing what's come out and like playing that, like how do you feel?
I was so deeply disturbed by the trial. Like, I was deeply disturbed. I mean, I was deeply disturbed by everything. I mean,
So
I think,
right.
I mean, it really fucked me up. I mean, I went a lot. It's like a mile from where I live. I was like, I got to see what's happening here, right? And the fact that there was no video and there was no audio in the courthouse. I mean, I went from thinking like, you probably have seen the transcripts or whatever of that when Claire was arraigned and the judge went off on her, right, for the $100 million bail. And like, what is wrong with you? Like, what is wrong with you? And I mean, it's so fascinating just because like she's from this prominent, big Jewish family. And in New York, these things matter, right? That's a very key thing to say, I think. Like, these things matter, whatever. But like, these things matter. And like, people reached out to me after the article and they were like, you're joking me that this is the Bronfman girl. Like, what? Like, these are pillars of the temple. Like, what is happening? And so I went from seeing Claire be arraigned and being like, oh my God, like, this is real. These people are going to prison. Like, there is no question. Everybody is burning, and the idea that you're all standing by Keith, anybody connected to Keith is going to burn, right? And then, but having it as the trial played out, reveal more and more of like Keith's utter and complete madness, and the women who took the stand. I mean, again, I would say the women who took the stand were shockingly like articulate and just telling an incredible story. And like, it goes back to this idea that you guys talk about all the time, which is like, who can be in a cult? Like, who gets in a cult? Because you have this idea that it's just like brain dead people, right? But it's not. And, I don't know. It was just, it was, I found it to be like one of the most disturbing. Like, I had complete insomnia during that trial. I was just totally freaked out. Yeah. And I mean, I'm like freaked out these people are in the world, like I just freaked out by the whole thing.
Yeah, us too. It's so
At
dark.
the same time, I want, some of them to have another life, right? Like, I mean, I feel both ways. I mean,
Yes,
some of
we
them,
want all of
I
them
don't
to have
want to
another
have
life.
I totally do. I totally do.
For sure, Keith needs to stay in prison for the rest of his life. Part of this whole thing of why, like, when Mara reached out, I was like, yes, of course. And she was saying that you weren't sure, like, how we feel about you. And I just want you to know, and I meant to say this at the beginning. I think I did, actually, like, no hard feelings. Because for us, like, anyone who goes, oh shit, like, this is bad, then we're fine with. Like, we're all on the same page.
Right.
Like, but there was a time.
We're informing people.
But there was a time, as you know, that we didn't trust you. And I just wanted to tell this backstory because I think it's interesting how it all played out. Like, and a lot of our fan base are survivors, and a lot of them are just NXIVM nerds. We call them NXIVM nerds. They're like obsessed with this story and they want to know all the details. And I just think this part of history is so wild because, as you know, the New York Times came out and I was on the cover. And then we had heard, because we had friends still on the inside who were kind of playing both sides, right? And they were like, they're going to do a counterpiece. We were told that they were hiring you.
Oh, that's so crazy.
And I was like, I don't think they can do that.
Yeah.
But that was sort of like how it was being pitched. Like, they were curating the story. So we knew that this was happening. We knew that, and my memory is fuzzy because it's 5 years ago and we were in trauma. So Nippy, correct me if I'm getting something wrong here. Like, jump in anytime.
But I was in trauma too. So.
Yeah.
She was in trauma more.
Well, maybe a little bit. We went in and out of different amounts. So we heard that you were writing the story, and then we didn't know who it was. And then I guess through my PR, like, I had to hire a PR team because I was getting so many requests, and like I didn't know how to handle it, and like Dateline and Inside Edition and Dr. Oz and 2020. Like it was, everybody wanted to talk. So I hired a PR team and they brought me to you and I think they kind of vetted you. But there was this whole internal, like we call them team takedown. The people who were out, we weren't on the same page because I believe you wanted to speak to us, like Mark and Bonnie and Nippy and I. And I think, oh God, what happened? The first time we connected, or was it the first time you connected with Mark? I don't remember, but there was something.
I think I talked to Mark.
Right.
Yeah.
And the conversation you had with him led us all to believe that you had already been indoctrinated and that you were like brought into the fold and you were drinking the Kool-Aid. And so they didn't trust you. And this is where we didn't have the same approach. I remember thinking, well, if she's drinking the Kool-Aid and she bought into the whole, consenting adults narrative, then we need to tell her our side of the story, right? And fill you in.
Right. Well, what happened from again, like it's a little fuzzy for me as well, but from my perspective, I got everything I needed from NXIVM. So I said, okay, great. Now I'll talk to the defectors. Now, I didn't think you guys were going to be hard to talk to because I just assumed, well, these people want to talk to everybody because they're trying to get the word out and they seem to be talking to everybody. So I don't think this is going to be a problem, right? And again, I think that's, looking back on it, that was naive, right? So I believe, reached out to Mark and I got on the phone, but I was also wary of what could be put on the Frank report or something else of what I would say. Because again, like I got what I needed from NXIVM, but we still needed to fact check the thing. We needed to finish the thing, blah, 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 blah. Like the best tactic for me was to have both sides talking to me and then put my piece out. And that would be when NXIVM found out what I thought, right? And so I talked to Mark. I mean, my recollection of it, and Mark may have a different one, is that he asked me who I had talked to, and I said, Lauren. And he was like, whoa, what?
I remember. I remember now.
That's probably the one person that you could have said that would have struck the fear of, because she spends a good one.
Right. Because
she's smart.
Smart one.
Yeah,
that was clear.
She's super smart.
Well, I'll also say this. She did a very, very good job
at normalizing
the abusive stuff because she had been in it for so long. So she really didn't believe it was bad.
Right. And she's cool.
Yeah.
Like we pictured you and her hitting it off. And we were like, oh, fuck. And now I remember.
And her subtly dropping comments about our character.
I remember what it was now. You guys spoke. And Mark, even though we were all on the same side, like there was still a bit of the ranking system. Like Mark was above a little, at least for me. Like he's leading the charge.
He thought he won one way and you thought otherwise.
We disagreed, which is one of the first times that had happened since leaving. But I remember now. So before you and I spoke, and you guys had that conversation, and you said that you spoke to Lauren, and he was like, "Whoa!" In that whole time frame, Bonnie found on the Frank report someone to take and snap. Do you remember this? Taking pictures.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's
of
right.
The summit at Apropos, and she saw someone she didn't recognize in the crowd, and it was you, and she figured out it was you, and then she was like, "Oh my God, she's in there, she's infiltrated." She's like,
I thought that as well, though.
Well, we all did.
Yeah.
I was like, fuck this. I'm not having the conversation under their terms.
Because you were now an enemy, right? But the difference is that I was still like, I'm going to talk to her.
We still have the truth.
Because I know that I have the truth, and I know that if they're going to head fuck Vanessa, and she's going to buy in because Lauren's so cool and hip and like whatever, like branding, blah, 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 then I have to tell you. And so we did, but we did it off the record.
And it was a huge turning point. I mean, for me, I would say, okay, so, and what had happened was I said, I think to Mark, let me send you, also it just was hard for me to understand. I was like, are you guys not reading what I write? Like I've written hundreds of articles that are like not like positive on a lot of different stuff, but I sent the article that I had written about Landmark to Mark without really looking at it again. And then when I went and looked at it, I was like, oh my God, there's like 10 quotes in here from Chuck Palahniuk. And like, if that's how you pronounce his last name, like from the Fight Club writer and all these other people saying how great Landmark Forum is. And that story was about like, I attended Landmark and went on the subway after one of the sessions, and I saw one of the guys who was in there, and he was a refugee from Africa, and a woman who had met him, on the subway, actually, I think, had like just walked up to him on the subway and said, do you want to change your life? Like, I'll pay for you to go to Landmark Forum. And so he was sitting there, and then I saw him on the subway, and he and I started this whole conversation. And it was really this like interesting question of like, do you want to change your life? I mean, this guy is like living as like a Shabbos goy, and like he has nothing, and like he's not looking at his personal growth. He's just trying to like day to day like feed himself, you know? So the question of Landmark and like, what are you really getting and who is it catering to and how deep are the questions they're really asking was like very much part of that story. But I did what I normally do, which is I try to like, you know, do sweet and sour, right? Because I think that's much more effective. Like in a lot of storytelling, you know, you want the suspense. I mean, look at even the way the Vow season 1 is constructed. Like the whole thing. I mean, what I was amazed by is those first couple of episodes of the Vow. I was like, this feels like my journey, being like, what is this thing? And they're trying to explain it to you through graphics and through you guys coming in, but it's so incredibly like ornate and complex. And it's like looking at this big, you know, expressionist painting or something. You're like, what is this? So for me, I felt like, okay, well, Mark will, you know, everybody can look at this Landmark story and they can see that this is not a positive story. But I wasn't at that point planning to put in like a million incredible quotes like by
Right.
like Lauren, like saying this is the greatest thing ever. I mean, I was going to do some of that, but I wasn't. So anyway, whatever. It basically just like I was there at the Coach Summit. Like they invited me to go. I was extremely happy to be there.
And I'm
to
so glad
see
you
the whole
did.
situation. And you know, as I do, like in my podcast, I think that one of the big moments where I was just so thoroughly sick of them was during the Coach Summit. I was standing in their like sort of halfway backstage, and they had an iron out and an ironing board to like iron
Do the sash
on
stripes.
the sashes. And
Mhm.
in the main room, Allison had a bunch of the Mexicans there, and she was like, everybody, we're going to play charades. Like, this is how you play charades. And I was just like, you know what? I'm done. I'm out of here. I can't do this one more minute. Like, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
Like, I can't be in here. Like, this is such a charade, you know?
And-
we know the feeling.
Oh, yeah.
All right, fair enough.
Imagine having to sit in that room with those orange chairs and the bad lighting for 12 to 14 hours a day for 8 days.
Right. Yes.
If people think that you can't be indoctrinated or brainwashed, try sitting in apropos in that environment, talking about what is the difference between honor and character.
Right.
And
Can we at least do some like CrossFit at the same time so we can get in shape, or like we just have to starve ourselves and like run later? Yeah.
I used to leave and like pretend to go pick up Troy or like have a emergency so that I could just go for a walk because I was like losing my mind. So listen,
Right.
I get it.
But then you got on the phone with me. I mean, basically what happens
Yes.
is like there's this sense like, no, they're not talking to you. And I was like, what? Well, I don't have a peace without them. So they have to talk to me.
This is the golden age of cult recovery. The more we speak up and share our stories, the more we realize we are not alone. Your voice and your story can empower others. This is Sarah, and I'm proud to be a founding collaborator of the #IGotOut movement. Learn more at igotout.org. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or never miss yoga. Maybe it's getting 8 hours of sleep. I mean, that's my personal and everyone's dream, isn't it? Well, I definitely have some non-negotiables. Like, I'm in Vancouver right now, and I'm spending literally as much time as I can outside in nature. #cold pools, #crushing it. Nature is a non-negotiable. Not enough time in the fresh air and the trees around me, and I start to feel not great, not myself, not grounded. Therapy day is a bit like my nature walks. I try to not miss it, and I know I'm just going to feel so much better all around if I make it a priority. I get so much out of it. It helps me put my worries and anxieties in their rightful place and helps me clear my mind so I can focus on what I really need and sometimes what I don't need. Like, I don't need to be overbooking myself just because I hate to say no to people. You know what I mean? Thanks, therapy. Thanks for helping me see that. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Look, even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/culty today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/culty.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
So we weren't talking to you because Mark had decided that because you said that you were only speaking to Lauren, and we knew that that wasn't true, they didn't trust you.
In my mind, it was when he said, first of all, look, a lot of journalists, if somebody says, who are you speaking to? The answer is supposed to be, I can't tell you, but I'm speaking to a lot of people and I'll make sure I'm fair, right? Like that's the answer. But I was like, okay, like, let me tell him. So I said, Lauren, and my recollection was, I was like, he was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I was like, well, I better stop right there, you know?
Right. Listen, we all were paranoid for different reasons. I mean,
Very
and us
understandable.
probably,
Yeah.
us probably more so. And listen, Nippy and I discussed whether we were to share this with you, but we felt like we needed to come clean. We were so paranoid, especially because we weren't sure if you were a plant or hired, because we thought you might be hired. That was one of the theories. And we said that we weren't going to record our conversation. We did record our conversation.
Ah, okay.
And
that's all right.
And we didn't show any. We just wanted to tell you because we felt
That's
bad
all
about that,
right.
because
That's all right.
that would be an example of an ethical lie, which we talked about.
Well, I wasn't playing by anyone's rules.
No, we were
I was
like,
I don't
fuck
give
you.
a fuck about
Fuck,
the
not
rules.
you, Claire.
I'm protecting my family.
Yeah,
I'm gonna do it.
No, we didn't show it to anybody. It was just to like, in case it was protective. It was in case,
I mean, to me, the big turning points for me were, first of all, talking to you and when you told me about the grandmasters, because I didn't know that to that point. And you said, like, well, they call them grandmasters. I was like, this one's a master of the blah, 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 blah. Like, how does this really work? You know? And at that point, I think I had Keith telling me I had sex with one, maybe two people who are in DOS. Like, I don't really, I know them. I mean, we're intimate, but it's not sexual and like blah, 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 blah. And I just remember you like laying that out. And you were like, oh, honey, this is not like, I mean, I probably didn't say to you, like, I don't understand, but like, that's what was going on. I was like, I don't really understand and can't accuse this man of sex crimes unless I'm sure. Remember, this was all like pre-indictment, right?
Right.
So talking to you was a big,
I'm so happy to hear
shift
that
for me, because I had talked to Rick Ross, but Rick Ross's role in this whole cult scene is so fascinating to me, and like who pays his bills and how that all works. And his role is just to be like a spear, right? Just to say like, this is really bad. Everybody listen to this. Pay attention over here. So it was like, okay, well, fine. You were involved also in this major lawsuit, but like, I need to get closer in. And the other person who I think felt burned by my story, because I didn't use that much of her, unfortunately, and the part that we used was maybe not the part she wanted to, was Barbara Boucher, who was incredibly helpful to me. Like incredibly helpful. And I feel bad that happened. And it's like one of those things that happens like when you're closing a piece, blah, 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 But like the two of you that I felt were leveling with me, that were trustworthy, that were smart and could explain like why this fakakta philosophy was not like
do you know what fakakta means?
How am I like dumb? Like, why don't I understand this philosophy? Like, no, it makes no sense. Like, that was helpful.
That makes me happy because it was a risk. We were both pretty clear that, truth was on our side and that we could, we could fill you in. We're like, I might have to fill you in. Like, if Vanessa's been head fucked and brought in, and I could tell in the languaging that you were using with me that you had been, I mean, we knew that because of some of the ways that you spoke, which is fair enough. And actually, even when your article came out, we still disagreed. They were like, see, she did it. I'm like, no, this is proof that, a smart journalist can see the good of it. It shows that anybody can get wrapped up in something like this. This is a win.
It's a great point.
This is a win. I felt really great about your article. I was like, this is a win. Other people didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like, look, I think it goes back to what I said at the beginning, which is like, if I had this all to do over after the trial, would I have written a different story? Yes. Do I think the story I wrote was actually a really important part of this history of NXIVM? Yes, I
100%.
do. And I don't agree that it's like, a paid for story or, I think
No,
that
of course not.
I've sort of, keyed in that a lot of the more serious journalists who have been on the story who, read this. Look, of course, everybody, so many people wish they could have sat down with Keith, right? And had him one-on-one and really made him answer for this. And I didn't do that, right? And I have to own that. I didn't do that.
But you didn't know what you were looking at.
I didn't know what I was looking at, but also, like, I believed that eventually they were just going to open it up, right? I kept on being like, so if I believe more of this, you will open up more. And indeed, when I said to Lauren, look, I think you're not empowering women. I think what you're doing is hurting women. I think you're actually, not just saying, let's look at the ways women are weak. You're actually encouraging them to be weak. It did turn into one of those like flying monkey situations where Nancy like came over to me and was like, what were you saying to Lauren? You know what I mean? Like, and everybody was like, she said something to Lauren. She said something to Lauren. And I was just like, wait, like even this much criticism? Like you guys are not down?
That's a great example because you couldn't, if you had said anything like that as a student, you would have had for sure Nancy bringing you in, giving you an EM. Why do you think it's important for you to question this right now? What's going on for you? Like that's so clear. And so you experienced it. That is total flying monkey 101.
Yeah, I think that there were things about NXIVM that drew people in. And I think that people needed to experience a story that, look, the cover of this magazine story, I believe, said something like Keith empowered women by making them feel they were in control. Right? But they were basically like slaves of his was the sort of takeaway, right? That like mind trick. And you needed to show the trick, right? To have the effect of it. Now, all that being said, I would say the thing that I think there's two separate things. First of all, my perspective when people were like, she should have said this and this and this, I was like, you should have told me then. Right? Because this is not a clip job. This is the New York Times. And in the New York Times, we do primary sourcing. And if you aren't telling me that directly, and I cannot write your name down on a piece of paper for, our standards committee to read, then I cannot put it in the article. And I think maybe I did say that a bunch of times, but I should have been maybe more clear about like, this is going out the door. And if I don't get these things from people, like they will not be in the story. But regardless, the thing, I do feel that at the time there was this sense like, well, she wrote the big article on NXIVM and she didn't mention this, 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 and this. Now, we all couldn't have known that everything was going to come out in the trial and all those things were going to be mentioned and every secret was going to be out there, right? So eventually that was all sort of came out in the wash. I do feel, however, that, when we did the photography, Keith and Claire, I believe, flew down somebody from Albany, which I knew. And I saw the photos. And, my thought was like, oh my God, they look so creepy. Like, this is sort of great.
They were so creepy.
We ran those photos, which, look, we're coming to photograph you. Like, you can do what you want. Present yourself how you want. We're not here to tell you what makeup person to hire. We're not hiring a makeup person for you. This is how you want to present yourself. I would have gone back and advocated for, I don't like write the captions or the headlines or anything like that, but I would have gone back and said, like, we should make clear they hired somebody. This is not what they looked like when I saw them. Just because, they wanted to look so businessy, right? It was like, we're business people. We're very put together business people, which I thought was great, but still.
I never saw Claire. Claire never looked like that.
Right. Like not in a fleece.
Keith never wore a suit.
Right. Exactly. So that was, that was part of the theater of the thing for them. And I would have wanted to point that out.
Anything else you would have done differently? I mean, obviously we'd all do things differently knowing what we know now, but given that you were being lied to. Given that you were being lied to.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, if that story was 3 times as long, I would have put myself more in it. I would have explained more of where I was coming from. I would have probably really gotten into Eduardo and Michelle and explained more the campaign against me. And I would have figured out what to do about Keith. Because really, I used like a few quotes from Keith, right? Like, because I felt that he was so useless when I was talking to him that there was no way to get him into the story. But I think had I it to do over, I would have really figured out how to put that on the page, like the degree to which you're facing somebody who is just not making any sense, right? And that was part of the misdirection. And I mean, the DOS stuff, I don't know. I mean, it's so hard. Like, I guess I would have put more about that in there. I guess I would not have put Sarah in at all. I think that I liked
You mean
Sarah.
Sarah, right? Sarah Brockman?
Sarah.
Yeah.
Not
Okay.
you, Sarah.
Yeah. Yeah. She made you good eggs, right?
She made me eggs. Yeah. And like, would I have put in the stuff about her and the like Dalai Lama's emissary? I don't know. It sort of goes back to what I said before, which is this was a moment in time that I got like a weird vision of these people, right? Because really it was a few months. Like I reported for a couple of months with them. Then you and I talked, Sarah, and then I talked to a few other people, and then the indictments came down, right? And then we rushed the piece out. So for me, it's like a snapshot of a moment in time. There's a million different things I wish I could have put in there now. And I think on the balance it was probably a little too sweet, right? Like in terms of that sweet and sour, I would have reconnected the balance a little bit, although I do think it was like sort of effective.
It was, yeah. I don't think anyone's going to read that and be like, I want to try it. Like
It's definitely like, this is scary. Like
it wasn't the puff piece that they had.
No,
they
it
thought
wasn't
that they were
positive.
getting from you.
And the
No.
photographs didn't help. I'm telling you right now, the photographs were like,
right.
even if you had, to me, that was one of the most bizarre things.
Because they weren't
about it.
authentic. They weren't
Totally.
authentic, right?
They looked
were.
bizarre.
They looked like wax figures or something.
They did.
did.
They
They really did. Keith's eyes were weird and watery. Like I was like,
Well,
what
that's
is
how
going
they
on
are
here?
anyway. Vanessa, I have one question here as it pertains to Sarah. Did you speak with Sarah? And then, like, what do you think her responsibility is in this from Mirren? What did she know and all that stuff?
God, I would love to know. I mean, my feeling was Sarah was brought there to meet me, right? Like she came to Albany to meet me and to vouch for Claire. I don't know. Like, why was Nikki not indicted? Like, what is the truth about Sarah? How out was she? Because she certainly told me she was more out than she really was.
And
right?
she was.
She was doing all the Rainbow Garden stuff. What do you think her responsibility is?
I don't know what she knew and when she knew, so I can't really speak from that. But I do think the person that she talked about, the Dalai Lamas and all those people in the world, would be a little bit more sensitive to the abuse that happened, and with your resources, go and fix the abuse that happened and clean up your mess. To me, that's the road to vindication in your own internal world and in the eyes of the world. And instead, it's just distancing yourself and then not correcting the narrative when Keith blatantly lied when they released their statement, and not really being sensitive to how it affected other people's lives and just going back and not doing anything about it. That seems to be an obvious
But
pivot.
isn't it a Cain and Abel situation where...
There's always going to be that.
Mm-hmm.
You can't avoid that. I mean, I think if I had the opportunity she had with her resources to maybe at least go, hey, look, what did I participate in here, is a noble move. Just start there.
Yeah.
Maybe she will do that after Claire's...
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think if I were her, I'd make sure my sister was okay first. And I think that's going to be a battle at some point. Anyway, that's just my impression of it. And I'd love to see her do it.
Well, how do you two feel about Claire? How do you two feel about Claire now, knowing that she had this sort of campaign of terror against you, but now, she got a pretty significant sentence, yet she hasn't renounced Keith. She hasn't owned these mistakes as far as I know. I don't know if you both have knowledge that I don't.
If I could press a button and she would just go live a positive life, turn it around, whatever, and she could make something out of her life, I'd press it in a second. This is never about revenge or anything like that, but it also presents to me a little bit of a danger, because if she's still thinking and feeling those ways and she has resources, then she's demonstrated she's willing to use and abuse to right what she thinks is wrong. I look over my shoulder a little bit because she has the means. So I don't know. I don't know what we're looking at, and I don't know who she blames for her problems, but I know it was us at one time, and we were in her crosshairs, and she hired a private investigator. So why wouldn't I be scared of that? It's smart for me to be scared of that.
Similar, just like if Lauren were to, like when Lauren wrote me and apologized, it was instant forgiveness because she took responsibility. Claire still hasn't taken responsibility and can't admit that she has made mistakes. And we all made mistakes under a false premise. Until she's willing to acknowledge that, then I don't want to say I'm scared. I don't live in fear, but if she gets out of jail, I don't know what we have to do. I have to cross that bridge. But I hope by then she will have had time in prison to think about it, and maybe being away from him and away from his, the tentacles in her brain, she'll recapitulate, which is an NXIVM word for like figuring it out.
Right. Yeah.
So I hope so. I mean, I don't think anyone signed up for this.
I'm rooting for that.
I'm rooting for it too.
For obvious reasons.
I've thought about sending her some books, some cult recovery books in prison from obviously not from me, because I'm sure she hates me, and that's like, go back to your series, like, thank goodness you had that audio footage, because I do think it fills in a lot of gaps and reflects what you said earlier, like the moment in time, even though we know now that it's a totally different picture and they were painting a whole tapestry of lies for you, thinking that the world would buy it. To hear that, it's quite remarkable. And it wasn't that upsetting. Like Nippy said, it's like what we heard was being said.
Right. From people who are still in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's my question.
Yeah.
It was what they told me was what they were telling people who are still in, basically. Right.
Yeah, we know.
And also partly we curated that. Like we said earlier, we curated our exit. So we knew to a degree what was going to be said. But to hear like Claire saying, well, Sarah saw two people being branded, so there was no surprise there. Like somehow that makes it better that I wasn't surprised, or, even if I did enjoy it in the moment, which I had to pretend to, as we all know now, doesn't change anything that they were lying about Keith's initials. Like it's just so,
It's so circular in conversation, so it gets a little tiresome.
Yeah.
But I think, Vanessa, to frame it in a way is like the world is just understanding how like awful this is. And they're educating themselves on it, and they're seeing it in a lot of arenas. And you're part of that process. Your article is part of that process. So it's important to see it and see the education of people and how they're still, when you have a dark force right in front of you, you feel it, but you don't see it. It's fucking weird, man. And people, I think, can start to become more sensitive to that. And I think we'll have an interesting outcome in evolution. I think these conversations are vital if they're in that lane. Right? Without the sensationalism, because you got close to it and it was weird.
It was really weird.
Have you recovered?
Right? It was fucking weird.
Yeah.
Have you recovered, do you think?
Yeah, I think I've pretty much recovered. I think, really during the trial was the time that I just felt like I couldn't believe that I'd been that close to something that evil, particularly all the Camilla stuff that came out. And just, I still sort of shake my head when I see articles about Nikki in the paper, and I don't know what to think of it or what to do. I mean, and I think to myself, like, what is the press's role here? I don't know. What do you think when you see all those stories?
I just leave it alone.
Yeah, I guess it was an inevitability, right? Like, it was an inevitability that there was going to be people left out of the prosecution, and that was part of what was going to happen. And look, I am sure that some conversations went on behind the scenes that were pretty nutty, right?
I think the best thing for anyone is just to leave them alone.
Right.
We're not going to be able to tell them anything they haven't already seen. It's not about me. And the hardest thing is disciplining yourself to not indulge their narrative and give them. I just can't. I can't do anymore. I don't have the energy.
What was the thing, looking back, that chaps your ass the most about your experience with NXIVM?
Well, when I was closing down the piece, and these people were indicted, I remember vividly talking to Keith's attorney, and I was like, okay, you guys are going with sex with one or two people in DOS. Like, you're going with that, You're going with that. That's your final answer. And he said yes. And I said, I can't believe you're actually just like, you don't want to really like shift this around here now. So just like the continual
gaslighting
again, like the gaslighting, I was willing to hear Keith out as a person who would say, I'm polyamorous, I have a harem, like let's do this. Let's get into this. Like, let's talk about like your sexual needs and your wants and your desires and what is your fucked up thing. Now, I assumed it was going to be like just a kinky thing, right? I didn't realize it was like a fully hardcore criminal situation. But his just like inability, I don't know, I just felt like, forget about your sexual shame right now. You are about to go to prison for life. Like, say something. Save yourself. I'm opening this up. I couldn't have made it easier for you, you know?
Right.
And maybe that's, you know, a sort of dumb journalist thing, which is like, come on, where's the scoop? Come on, guy, you know? But to me, it just has always stuck in my mind like, wow, you really thought I was that much of a pansy, I guess.
Do you think that Agnifilo changed his tune by the end because you were there in trial? Like, do you think he woke up to the shenanigans of KR?
I think that, you know, Agnifilo is an attorney who I would assume is bound by attorney-client privilege. And, you know, I think he's not his attorney anymore for a reason. And I think he did what he had to do, but he had a real weak case. And he has to have known that. You know, he has to have known that. So I would have a hard time believing that anybody on the defense didn't have the exact same experience that I had, right? Which is, you know, this is what criminals do, right? They lie to their defense attorneys too. And then they got to walk through the fire with them and go, you got to tell me everything. Like, that part of Law and Order is true. Like, please tell me everything. So once they realized what the truth was, I mean, deeply disturbed by it. I have to believe that they all were very deeply disturbed by it. And also probably realized they were, you know, had a losing ticket here. I mean, anybody that I talked to who was close with the case was immediately knowledgeable.
Hey there, listener. Hope you're enjoying this episode and that you're taking deep breaths when we cover the enraging stuff that cult jerks are up to. Let it out, as in the yoga practice. Inhale positivity, exhale negativity. That's for you, Sarah. We got this. No hulking it out, all you little hulksters. And if you need some helpful resources on the topic of cult recovery, check out our website at alittlebitculty.com. And now, here's a brief message from our sponsors.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or never miss yoga. Maybe it's getting 8 hours of sleep. I mean, that's my personal and everyone's dream, isn't it? Well, I definitely have some non-negotiables. Like, I'm in Vancouver right now, and I'm spending literally as much time as I can outside in nature. Hashtag cold pools, hashtag crushing it. Nature is a non-negotiable. Not enough time in the fresh air and the trees around me, and I start to feel not great, not myself, not grounded. Therapy day is a bit like my nature walks. I try to not miss it, and I know I'm just going to feel so much better all around if I make it a priority. I get so much out of it. It helps me put my worries and anxieties in their rightful place and helps me clear my mind so I can focus on what I really need and sometimes what I don't need. Like, I don't need to be overbooking myself just because I hate to say no to people. You know what I mean? Thanks, therapy. Thanks for helping me see that. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Look, even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/culty today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/culty.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
So the FBI didn't plant evidence.
I mean, I haven't followed that whole thing, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, look, if there's anything they could have used to get out of this verdict, like, they would have used it at this point. Right?
Yeah.
So they had no defense. The defense was the consenting adults. The problem with that defense is nobody was knowledgeable about what was happening to be consenting. There was no consent. Like, the mindfuck took away the consent.
Yeah. You can't consent when you're being lied to. Consent 101. And in terms of the word salad,
Yeah, I think it's just that, you hear Claire say, like, I have a very potent father. I definitely remember the potency and like what that was all about. And if
God.
he used that mostly for men or how that all
Oh,
worked. And the
God.
tantrum, Sarah had a tantrum. Barbara had a tantrum. Everybody was constantly having tantrums.
Edgar
My
Bronfman
Oh,
had a
my
father had a
tantrum.
father had a
tantrum.
tantrum. Right.
It's like, how belittling. How fucking belittling. You're having a tantrum. You're just a baby having a tantrum. No, I'm angry because, anyway.
Well, if a tantrum takes down your company,
Right.
how good is your company? Really?
And also,
If my tantrum.
how good is your company that you need another company within the company to use the tools to make your company work? I know we have like 1 minute. Any questions for us that like we're burning for you this whole time that you've always wanted to know?
Well, I guess it's like, do you think there's still more to know?
Yes.
What more is there to know? I mean, I know there's so many people who haven't spoken, right? Like, and they each have their individual
There's
stories.
so many people. Yeah. There's so many other stories of abuse, people who left even before we got in, who
Yeah, I think
experienced
there's
stuff
way more
and then like ran for the
women
hills.
who are abused.
Because you think about, and then we've talked about this in the podcast a lot, when he brought the women down for the commitment ceremony, like the group sex blowjob thing, his whole thing, and not just there, was to humiliate women so that like for them to come forward, they have to expose that and admit that they did X, Y, and Z as well. And that's what keeps people quiet. It's like a type of another level of collateral, right? To keep people
Well, I know,
quiet.
like, okay, so Kristen Keefe, I mean, amazing, has come out. And I mean, she has such a prismatic, incredible view on everything.
She's got a great mind.
But do you think that down the line, we're going to see books or podcasts or whatever from
Maybe.
Allison, from not just Nancy on the Vow, but like Lauren?
I hope so. I don't think Lauren. I think Lauren's gone back to her life and just wants to move on. I hope Allison, depending on how she handles this when she comes out, could totally turn it around and, tell her story and write a book or whatever she wants to do, and all the power to her. I think I just want everyone to be happy, and which is what we signed up for in the first place.
Mm-hmm. But do you think the shame of it for her will be too?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, maybe she'll like move to an island and raise llamas or something.
It depends what she feels responsible to as well in a lot of ways. I think right now she's in a place where she can be responsible to her own healing. And then I think she'll figure out whatever wisdom comes from that. I hope she shares, if that's her journey.
But in answer to your question, I think there's lots to discover about why these women died, why so many of them had these surprising cancers. And I have my own theories about that in my book, and I have to be careful.
And where's the $65 million that he quote lost?
Right. Oh, you don't believe it was really lost?
Look,
somebody got it.
I don't think that guy fucking knows the truth. I don't think he knows the truth. I think he knows the truth, and he'll purposely say in every sentence. Like just hearing that little bit with Allison Mack about how did you feel about that? And she said, this is how I feel. He's like, what, you thought I just met you? I wasn't asking that. He was asking her that.
The gaslighting in that quote. Oh.
And she was answering the question, honestly, not from a narcissistic place. And he flipped it on her.
Right. Yeah.
Like that
chapped
shit,
my ass.
man.
Yeah.
That shit's like fucked up. You know what I mean? And like he's always doing that. So why wouldn't he lie about where $65 million are?
Yeah. I think there's probably a lot to do with the money. And I think
there's
people,
something
somebody
there, yeah.
wrote, I think in NPR about this, like, where's the money? Where's the role of the money in all this? And I think it is something that's really interesting. Like, where's the money? What did they use it for? How did it work? And what was the role of money in like attracting people like you guys to it? Not that you were going to make money that was going to help you with your life, but just that, oh my God, if there's people who have so much money and have every option in the world open to them, why would they be here? Like that's that's your lift. Like that is something that you look twice at and go, well, okay, if the Brahmins could do anything, why would they do this? It must be
That's a
great,
good point.
And just figuring that all out. But I definitely heard bits and pieces from Claire about, different issues with money.
Tell our listeners where they can find you.
I have a podcast out called Infamous, and it is sort of an anthology of some of my old work. And it has a bunch of episodes in there about my experience interviewing NXIVM, called The Last Days of NXIVM. And it's when I went down to Mexico and to Albany and interviewed the whole clan of criminals who are currently imprisoned before the indictment.
Amazing.
And it is a fantastic listen. Listen to
Thank
it
you.
twice.
Thanks. I'm so glad that we were able to do this. I mean, I knew that, you would want to hear it, but I also really appreciate you having me on to talk about it. And I mean, I
Yeah,
hope,
of course.
I was kind of like, is this going to be super triggering or is this going to be super interesting or both? Or
Both.
how is it going to, yeah.
Both.
Yeah.
But that's part of our journey.
Look, it's obvious we're in parallel lanes of informing people. So as long as it's about that, I mean, those conversations are great. Comparing and contrasting those things are fun and beneficial. So
And I'm glad
thank
we're all
you.
on the
Thank
same page
you.
now.
for doing what you're doing too. It's-
You guys are amazing. Like, amazing.
Aw,
I mean,
thanks,
thank God for
Vanessa.
podcasting, right? Like,
Right.
Right?
what?
Nobody would know that now, right?
Who knew in 2017
Who knew?
that this was going to save
Yeah.
everybody? Like, but you guys are so, I mean,
Yeah.
your podcast is so good. And the way that like people everybody thinks you're friends. You know what I mean? Like, you're like everybody's friend.
Well, we would have been. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
That's,
And we've met some amazing people. It's been such a the silver linings that have come out of this shit show debacle, aka NXIVM, has been kind of wouldn't change anything because here we are. Life is good.
So strange. Yeah, it's an interesting life. At least you can say that. It's an interesting life. All right. Thanks a lot.
Cheers
I
to
really
that.
appreciate it. Okay. Take care.
thank you, Vanessa. Awesome.
So what'd you think, Ned?
I think it's an informative episode, and Vanessa does a great job staying in the lane of informing people. And just so everyone knows, we were approached by someone who shared with us that Vanessa wasn't quite sure how we felt. And after listening to her episodes, it's clear that she's in the lane of informing people. And as long as she was doing that, we're congruent in our missions.
We're allies.
Yeah, we're allies.
And it reminded me, I think part of what felt so good to have this conversation is that it reminded me of a time where it was like, you're either in or you're out. You're either with us or you're against us, which sucks because it didn't leave room for the nuance of
Right.
I believe you, but this is my whole community. I can't just leave. And knowing what I know now, it was like the flip side of the us versus them mentality.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We learned that, I think, from Yanya Lalit, who helped us. It's like a lot of cult survivors go from us versus them to another us versus them. We're just the them now. And they are the us, but we're just on the other side. And if I could have done things differently, I would have, I can't do anything differently.
Well,
But
you
it's
weren't
just
gonna
something to learn about.
Yeah, you weren't going to do
from.
anything who were in that psychology, but I don't think that Vanessa necessarily was. And she's later shared that her conversation with you helped,
Yeah,
right?
that was key.
So it ended up being a good decision.
Is there any other nuggets that you felt were really interesting or really profound that you wanted to share?
Well, I thought their strategy, like she said, they made such a big deal of my tantrum.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
God, I wish I could have been a fly on the wall at some of those meetings.
Okay.
Maybe we will someday get access to
Be
the
a
audio.
fly on the wall for those meetings. I think that's come and gone.
Do you believe in reincarnation?
It's good to know that ended up having a positive effect. So that's it. I think there's going to be more from Vanessa at some point,
Mm-hmm.
but for sure, give her series a listen.
Yes. For people who are serious, especially NXIVM nerds, and they love to try to figure out the psychology of all these people and the level to which people in NXIVM were lying to the outside world, it's all there in terms of how Allison Mack was set up.
I think Claire's going to be the most disturbing because she's the one that nobody's really had access to. I think most people have seen kind of Allison Mack, heard her statements, everyone else.
Mhm.
Claire's been somewhat hidden.
Claire's is disturbing. Yeah. I think you're right.
I think it'll be interesting for people to understand why we were afraid in the way that we were afraid
Yeah.
and continue to be.
I think so too. And we're going to end now, but we're going to include a couple of highlight clips at the end of this. And then we encourage you to go download the whole series. But here's some of our favorite clips before we sign off. And thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Here you go.
From a very young age, it was just something that I loved. I loved horses more than anything. I loved horses, and I loved the connection with them. And so I would spend a lot of time with them, and I just spent more time in the stables than in the house. It was easier. Those things that were going on in the house that were difficult.
Do you still ride?
It was an interesting thing. I went through the Olympic trials in 2004, and I faced a question that was very hard for me. I had a new horse. He was difficult, and when I would become nervous about something, he would literally just stop. And my trainer at the time said to me, "You have to take a stick and you have to beat the shit out of him. You have to do it once." And if you do it strong enough and hard enough once, you'll never have to do it again and you'll be okay. And I couldn't. I just couldn't bring myself to do it.
Yeah.
So I said, you know, there's got to be another way. And he said, I don't know another way. And I said, well, if it means, you know, winning the Olympics or this is the end of my career, I can't in good conscience be on the Olympic team knowing I beat the shit out of one of my horses. It's just not something I can do. I mean, it's interesting because I actually, you know, my father had a tantrum. And we have A-list actresses who have taken our programs. We have royalty that's taken our programs. We have ex-presidential families that have taken our programs. Plus the regular Tom, Dick, and Harry, you know, like, we respect people's privacy. And that's important to us. And believe me, if we didn't, there's a lot that we could have done. I mean, understand, we know so much about all of our adversaries. We have so much of so much shit that we could go to town with, and we won't do that. For example, you know, there's a video of Sarah Edmondson's branding, and, you know, it's such a lie.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Hope you like this episode. Let's keep the conversation going and come hang out with us on Patreon, where we keep the tape rolling each week with special episodes just for Patreon subscribers and where we get deep into the weeds of unpacking every episode of The Vow.
And if you're looking for our show notes or some sweet, sweet swag or official ALBC podcast merch or a list of our most recommended cult recovery resources, visit our website at alittlebitculty.com.
And for more background on what brought us here, check out Sarah's page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, narrated by my wife, and at most bookstores.
A Little Bit Culty is a Talkhouse podcast and a Trace 120 production. We're executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, with writing, research, and additional production support by senior producer Jess Tardy. We're edited, mixed, and mastered by our rocking producer Will Rutherford of Citizens of Sound, and our amazing theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant and co-written by Nigel Asselin. Thank you for listening.